Okay. So just for purposes of the recording, so that there's a bit of context in place, the study today is just on how to be better teachers. Um, how can we leverage, different techniques to be better at what our job function is, really. To be teachers to either those in the world, to next generations, in millennia to come in heaven, wherever we are, whatever the context is, how can we be better teachers? And setting the groundwork, or at least the primer, for doing that, I wanted to refer to a study that was done last year, where I laid out, 7 different phases of the knowledge life cycle, if I can call it that. And the first one is this acquisition of knowledge. And Cedri rightly pointed out that a person and a computer, AI for that matter, whatever the case may be, can gain knowledge or information, acquire knowledge or information from different sources. It can come from your senses, your eyes, your ears, your touch, your smell, or it can come from an active, deliberate effort to go out and pursue knowledge. So the example that was given was Cedri decides, I'm going to do a study on radical feminism. Something inspired her to do that study on radical feminism or the second wave of feminism or third wave, whatever it is, something inspired her to do that. And she wants to know more about it. And so she goes to gather information. It's this first step where she just and it can get overwhelming because there's just so much information out there. But this is where a good teacher, steps in and says, okay, there's all this information, and here comes the second step, which is your formation of knowledge. So, someone else, what do you think takes place after you've gathered all this information? So, you're going to do a presentation on second wave feminism. You've gone on the internet. You've got the dates. You've got the key people involved in the second wave. You've watched different presentations. Now, what do you do with all that information that you have in your hands? Yeah.
I like the way Elder Paminda put it. He said that a good teacher is one that gets a complicated situation presentation or study and makes it simple for the people, members.
Mm-hmm. So
So it's
before
a
we
lot
get
of
to that point,
information and then, oh, sorry, and then a lot
yeah,
of information you bring together and make it look easy.
sure. So you're kind of yeah, that's definitely part of this life cycle. But we're on this initial stage, Cedri's learnt about radical feminism or second wave feminism before she gets to the point of teaching and sharing what she wants to put together. There's something new that clicks in her that, society just hasn't been exposed to before. Let me give a different example.
You mean
So let's,
understanding?
mhm. Yeah, exactly. So there's some level of understanding uh, that has to take place. When Albert Einstein, was there, or Marie Curie discovered something, she had to go and get new information about this thing. But now when it's putting this together, and I guess this is where your point comes into, it's you have to, as a teacher or Marie Curie, whatever the case may be, um, you need to create new knowledge. And this desire or the method of creating new knowledge is taking all that information because you are inspired to go and get this information, and you experiment. You observe how this new information impacts the world around you. So for us as students of prophecy, you're standing at 1989, you're inspired, and you gather information about the Berlin Wall, about Daniel 11, 40 to 45. And now you need to put it into reality. So you see what the implications of all this are before you start putting it into pen to paper, if you want to say it that way. So you form something with this new information. So I'll say in this case, God has inspired a person. That person goes and gather information about this inkling, this thought, this hypothesis that they have. And so they gather information to try and, prove their hypothesis, to say, okay, we actually are living in the time of the end. And so they're creating new knowledge. It's something that the world hasn't seen before. So they have to do research, has to go into SOP, have to go into the Bible, and you have to experiment. And along that journey of experimentation, as you will all know, as humans, when we experiment, some failures happen, mistakes happen. But it's through that process of experimentation that, knowledge genuinely is created. Do those first two steps make sense? Of first gathering information, and then now you want to create something with that information. So you research more about it, you experiment, you observe. Yeah, does that make sense? Any questions?
It makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. And so now I'll say Elder Jeff or William Miller is standing there at the time of the end, and they have the idea that Jesus is coming in our timeline, in our dispensation. Is that enough to go off and run with? It's not. They have to validate that knowledge, or whoever it is that is listening to this hypothesis or this theory that this teacher has, they have to validate it. And that validation it's needed, because how are we able to, that's how we hold people to account. How can I phrase this? Hold each other accountable for whatever it is that God is wanting to share with us. And so how do we validate whether something is true or not? Just some examples of you here, presenter, you are standing in 1992, and Elder Jeff comes knocking on your door and says, knock, knock, I have this theory, this idea that Jesus is coming in our generation. This is the last generation. What's your next step as a faithful Berean?
How do you know?
Yes, how do you know? So they have to show you their proofs, they're working. And then what else? You take all that, you go away, Cedric, and what do you do?
And you check it out, you research it, you check it out,
Mhm.
and you see if it is so.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of questions too.
Exactly. So this is where you're now verifying whether that, we'll say, new message is indeed accurate, if it's reliable, if it's there's a term called stress testing, where you ask different questions of this new theory to see if it holds up, if it won't just break apart, have all the holes in the argument being laid by that teacher that's come to you being plugged. Doesn't make sense. So you have to validate it before moving on. So now Cedric, Elder Jeff's validated it for you, or whoever the teacher is has validated it for you. Someone other than Cedric, what's next? So you've had your knowledge and it's been formed. So if we were to imagine this abstract concept of knowledge is this thing. I don't know why I decided to draw a cloud, but it is what it is. So here's your knowledge. It's been formed. It's been validated that this is accurate. This is true. What next? You have to gain understanding of it. So while at a surface level, every new message comes at a surface level. You accept it, you validate, okay, this is true, I believe it. But at that surface level, we know that it's not enough to just stay there, to stay at this acceptance of this thing that you know is true or accurate. you have to understand it just a bit deeper. And so you apply it to this idea that the person came knocking on your door with. You try and look for patterns. We recognize that the Bible is full of patterns. If someone could remind me of the verse where God says that, what does it say? Something about, how consistent the Bible is. There's a thread through the Bible. Let me look for it. 3 seconds, sorry.
You're not on about line upon line, are you? You're on about a thread.
No.
Is that the line upon line? Oh, no.
No.
No. I'm thinking 2 Timothy 3:16, but that's not it. I guess I can use that, just how, all the scriptures in the Bible are useful for teaching, rebuke, correcting, training in righteousness, etc., as well as Hebrews 13 verse 8, the fact that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if
Second
that
Timothy-
is the case,
Second
and-
Timothy 3:16? No, I don't know if what did you just say, Timothy?
3:16, yeah.
Yeah, that's that's instruction in righteousness. I thought there was
Mhm.
another one actually, yeah.
There is another one, but I'll just use these two until someone brings me the other one.
Is it
Um,
like scripture supports scripture or support
Yeah.
defense
yeah.
itself? You know what you mean? I couldn't get the words exactly. Go on,
Mhm.
I'll have a look.
But yeah,
Is
the
it
whole
here a
principle
little,
behind
there a
that.
little?
That's not the
Again.
one. That's taken from Line Upon Line as well. But I guess the whole concept that I'm bringing out is the fact that, there's this consistent theme in the Bible. So a prophet that spoke in the Old Testament, Moses, has to agree at a foundational level with someone in the New Testament, Paul, because both of them being inspired by God, we recognize that there's a consistent thread. And what I'm not saying is consistent in application. What I am saying is consistent in principle. So if you know that's true, then this supposed prophet that comes knocking at your door, and you want to understand what it is they are sharing, you look for the patterns in what they've taught, and then you look in the Bible and you look in Spirit of Prophecy. If those patterns hold up, if there's any relationship with any other different studies. So the study of Pyrrhus, we're going to look at that. And I guess this would be a tool in which you do this. So line upon line of getting understanding is reading the story of Pyrrhus. What patterns do I see with other stories? How can I connect it to other concepts that I've learned? So you then get your understanding. And each of these we can dive into them deeper to understand each process or each step in this process. But now Cedri has understood. She's understood the message that's come, and now it's time for her to apply it. So she's going to apply everything that she's learned into different problems, whether it's now her teaching a new subject that she feels that, hey, hold on, this teacher or this prophet came with this new light. I went and I validated it, I understood it, and now I'm going to apply it to a different topic. So we'll give Elder Tess as an example. Elder Tess comes with the story or the concept that the Sunday law is not actually going to be based on Sunday. It's going to be based on human rights, equality, radical feminism. So Cedri comes and she validates that, understands it. Now she says, if that's the case, I wonder what the implications of that's going to be. How can I apply that concept to different studies? And so she goes about doing her studies, and here comes the next step, which is building. So she's going to build on that knowledge that she now has. It's been formed, it's been understood, it's been applied in her day-to-day life with taking away, you know, the sexism in her life. But now she needs to build on it. She needs to build on that original message that Elder Tess shared, or Elder Jeff shared, William Miller shared, or Samuel Snow said. Any one of those prophets, Jesus or John, it now needs to be built upon, because all that first person does when they acquire knowledge and they put it into a package is give you a foundational principle on which now you have to go and build upon. And so the last step is the sharing. So once you've built upon it by applying that knowledge into different areas, you can share it. And it's this stage where we can be better at being teachers, is how do we go about sharing this in a productive, constructive way in which it can be understood for different types of students, for us. And yeah, so I've laid this out in a kind of linear way where, you know, you go one, then the next, then the next, then the next. But as with most things in life, it's like a circle. It's iterative, where first you go there, and then you go back, and then you go there, and then you go back, and then you go there and back and back. It's never so straightforward where you just go through one to the next. It's you just go through multiple loops, where you can finally get to a point where something is holistic and you can see it in the grand scheme of things, I suppose. So each of these cycles, they happen at, if I could say, different scales, from, you know, your individual life. I've applied it to us in the movement, but it can be with anything. So you can apply each of these different and look at and see, you know, how each of these different 7 things have occurred when you've learned something new. Or it can apply at larger scales, you know, where science makes a breakthrough and Marie Curie discovers something, and that has ripple effects into us, you know, as a society. Us as a society. Or that in first feminist comes as this thought, that, oh no, we're not being treated okay. And that has ripple effects, you know, it gets built upon. And so you go through successive waves and society changes. So that's how something can happen at different scales. So before we now dig deeper into this stage, this sharing stage, I wanted to ask, does this cycle make sense? Are there any initial questions that anyone might have? Yeah.
What do you mean by building? Because obviously when I'm talking, I'm always talking about the movement, not outside of the
Yeah.
movement. What do you mean when someone takes Elder Tessa's message and builds on it?
So if we think of what building is, it involves the expansion and refining of existing knowledge. So if we think of a message that was taught by Elder Jeff, that's knowledge that exists come 2018. Now we are going to take this new message that's taught by the third angel, and we're going to see how that applies to different areas, how that can refine older material, so things taught by the first angel, and how you can integrate it with already established principles. So if I read Ellen White,
Curtis?
yeah,
But I have to stop you because otherwise I'll forget what I was going to say as you're going on, with
Sure.
points in the beginning. As far as I understand, when you've got a dispensation like Elder Jeff, Elder Tess didn't come along and I suppose she did, in a sense, change her meaning. Now I think about it, because the two streams are definitely changed, aren't they? So is that what you mean by building on it? How
It's
we used to
twofold.
understand two streams before, when Jeff gave it, to how we understand it in 2018.
So let me,
Do
here's
we
a
need an
simple
example?
example. Here's a very simple example. Here the first angel comes, and they just tell you that Jesus is coming within our dispensation. Okay? And that's all that they leave you with. That's the core theme of their message, really. It's just that Jesus is coming in this dispensation. Get your house in order, because judgment is at the door. And then here comes the third angel, and the third angel says, okay, yeah, Jesus is coming, but this judgment that you are pointing to, first angel, it's not going to be related to a Saturday, Sunday, Sabbath, Sunday, controversy. It's actually going to be about equality. So
That's
now,
just about progression, isn't it, Curtis? It's not like repeating a law or anything like that. It's just the message is progressing as we go
that's
along,
the same thing.
just like it did in 1844. Yeah.
That's the same thing. When a message progresses, it's being built upon. So where it starts off with one block, the third angel adds another block.
Yeah,
and
but you
it's
can't say
refined.
like Cedri learns Elder Tessa's message and then builds on it, because that sounds like you're adding to it. Can you? Is that what you mean?
Why can't she?
Maybe we've got the wrong definition. We understand differently what building means. You can't add to the message. You can't say it actually means this, what Elder Tess said.
No,
Maybe
that's
we
not
could in
what
the next
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is taking what a messenger says and applying it to different areas. So, for instance, what do we say the second angel did in 2001 when
Arrived.
Elder Parminder comes and starts teaching about the 25-20 and etc.?
You're saying 2001, Elder Parminder didn't come in. He didn't do the 25-20
In that
in
dispensation.
2001.
And he's within that dispensation. So
2009.
2001 to 2014. And we mark the second angel coming down in 2001, and the increase of knowledge and the formalization.
What was your question?
So when I say, when this message of time is taught or explained, two options. Is this new information, like a thought leader? Or is this just meant to build upon the idea that the time is now in 1989?
That's I think we're going to get a lot of different ideas on this. I think that Elder Parminder there was a thought leader, and I know there will be a lot of people say it wasn't.
I think we also got to realize that truth is progressive, and as you go along the dispensation, it does bring more things and makes us see things in a different way.
Yep, I agree, Cedri. So can I ask you, Natalie, in 1989, what was the core message of the first angel?
Well, basically come into this movement.
No, not
Well,
okay.
you
Yeah,
know,
come into this
about
movement,
Daniel
but
11
why
or
come into this?
time of the end.
But
Time of the end.
saying what about the time of the end?
It is now the time of the end, and Sunday law's coming.
So now is the time of the end, not yesterday, not in 200 years. Now.
But
So
back
what
then,
concept is that?
I know you're saying, I know you're trying to say it's time, but back then, I'm sure Elder Jeff, he didn't know about time. He was against time, and he didn't know the 126 brought him to.
Sure, I'm not asking what he did and didn't know. I'm just asking reality, because we are able to look back retrospectively and say what something actually was.
Yeah,
So
looking back,
as
it was
Ellen
time.
White says, the prophets spoke more for our time. They didn't know what they were saying, etc., etc. Or not Ellen White,
That's funny.
whichever verse that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's time. Yeah, I see what you mean, but I think that's different than predicting time, which is what Elder Paminder
I'm
did.
not
He
talking about
taught us.
predicting time. So
You've got it on the board.
yeah is a message about time. Yeah, do we agree about that?
Yeah.
And so we're going to predict into the future, or Elder Paminder is going to do a study about predicting into the future. The basis of this prediction came from where?
126.
From the 1 to 6,
Bible.
but essentially on the basis that now is the time, that now it's the time of the end, and so we can project into the future. So the idea is that the second angel built upon the concept of time that already was established at 1989.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's what the second angel does, which is different to what the first and your third angel do. Because your first and your third angel are going to come with something new. They've been inspired by God in whatever form, in whatever shape, through whatever means. It could be their lived experiences, it could be through society, and the Holy Spirit. Different means that they've been inspired. Coming
So
back
is the
to
second
this,
angel. We might argue about that. The first, second angel,
sure,
and the third are
but
inspired by God.
sure, that's fine. But let's just stick with the first and the third for now. That
Yeah, but I have to correct you.
their new information, because they're bringing something new into the fold, if that makes sense. Do you agree with that, at least?
What's with Elder Jeff, he's bringing in Daniel 11:40 to 45. That's the new, yeah?
Yeah, the fact that the
Alright.
time is now for
Alright.
judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And the third angel brings something new that previously we've believed that the Sunday law is related to a Sabbath Sunday test. And instead, this new information is that it's actually related to human rights. So that's new. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So now, just let's stick with those two for now. We'll go on to the second later, but let's stick with those two. So they have acquired this new information through inspiration. They go out and they get more information about what it is that they believe, what it is that they see in society, and now they have to put it into a package. We call this the formalization of message. However, I'm not putting this on a line just for clarification, but they put it into something that they can now share. If it's Elder Tess, she does studies, she gets information that she's now going to share with people at Arkansas School of the Prophets in 2018. And then this validation, understanding, application, building, and sharing is where we come in, because we've received what Elder Tess has shared. We're going to go and validate it. Okay, who are you? Like, why must I just believe what you've told me? So I'm going to go and validate whether it's true or not. And that might just be a surface level validation. It might even just be, I believe this is true because it makes sense. But there's a surface level of validation. And so this is the job of now the student. So here's your first and your third angel. We'll talk about the second in a minute. But here's your first and your third. I mean, Cedri, myself, I can't see who's on the call, whoever else is there, will go through each of these different phases before then going to share it. This building stage here is now all Elder Tess has told me and proved to me is that the Sunday law is about human rights. And she's told me, what that looks like day to day. It looks like radical feminism. Now, is that where my job starts? And I will draw inspiration by the second angel, from the second angel. This looks like new information. This story of predicting 2014, it looks like new information. But all it is an application of what, even though the prophet didn't know it at the time, they were time setting in 1989. Even though, as you said, Elder Jeff didn't know it, they were time setting. And so all that this second angel is going to do is going to take that concept that occurred using line upon line, and they're going to apply it to this idea of the 2520 and the 126 and the 151, if I'm not mistaken, and all those different elements of time setting. They're going to build upon this small, even though they didn't know it at the time, the small idea of setting time by using line upon line in 1989. And it's going to be built into what now exists as the 126, the 151. Have I explained that a bit better? You may not agree, but at least does what I'm saying make sense? That's directed to you, Natalie.
What was the original question?
Of the different roles of the first, second, and third angel, of what the second angel is doing exactly.
I disagree that they have different roles, but I think the question was different. Don't know what, I can't remember what it was though. I thought I was asking
You
a question
actually
on building,
Yeah, asked what building was, yeah.
and that was with regards to members, not the angels.
Sure. And so it's my belief that where we have not seen it as part of our job function, as teachers, I think that it is part of our job function to take a concept that, I'll say, the first or the third angel brings, take that concept and apply it to different areas of life. And that's what I mean by building, is how can I expand the message that they've given, not to bring something new, but to expand something. So a plant, a seed, when a seed is planted and that tree grows, you don't say that now this is something new when you see the leaves and the branches. It's still the same thing. It's just expanded. It blossoms this time. And so it's your duty to nurture that seed. I'm saying it's our duty to nurture that seed to allow it to expand. That's what I take as the building. It's allowing that seed to expand beyond just being a seed.
So is this an example any good? So like, for instance, in 2014, Elder Tess did a study with all a list of different things that happened in 2014 that we should see at the Sunday Law. So we look at them, blah, blah, blah. Let's go to India. She mentioned Modi. So not so long ago, I did a study last week on Modi. Is that expanding? Is that building?
Yeah, that's an example of it. It's a person can regurgitate what that seed contains, or they can take the principles of that seed, like you've done, and say, okay, how does this concept of authoritarianism and the breaking down of democracy apply to different nations? So I'm going to look at India and I'm going to see, hold on, there's similarities. So let's see how those similarities affect, or how we can compare and contrast it with America to see what we can understand about America's future, if that makes sense. So that's very much what I'm talking about when we talk about building.
So Curtis, is applying, would you say, because at first I was thinking, what's the difference? Because you said something about building being applying it in different areas, and then application obviously is doing that. But application, would you say, is more practical, applying that knowledge into your own life? So that would be, say, with gender equality, changing pronouns, changing the pronouns in the Bible, that kind of applying what you've learned in practical terms. And then the building is a deepening, would you say, a deepening knowledge of that subject by increasing your, without saying increasing your knowledge of it, but yeah, building is a good word. Yeah.
I think it's
repeating and enlarge, someone put in the chat, which I thought was good as well. So you now go away and find out more about India and the government and how it works, and seeing how that human rights are being oppressed, etc. So you kind of, would it be making it your own, settling into it?
To a degree, yeah, I
Interesting.
think that is the case, but it's not just making it your own for yourself. It's what you can contribute to the knowledge, the movement's knowledge base, if that makes
Yes, it's,
sense.
it's almost crossing over with sharing.
Yeah.
And of course, as you said, all these things they sort of go backwards and forwards. So often we get an acquisition of knowledge and then we just share it straight away. We don't even bother
Yeah.
to go and formulate, validate, understand. We think that's
Mhm.
amazing. Let's just dump that on someone or whatever. Not in a
Yeah.
bad way. I'm just saying that
Mhm.
there's a lot of crossover, because I was going to ask what's the difference between formation of knowledge when we said it was understanding it and then understanding it when you put it after validate. So you
Yeah.
kind of run it by others and then you're understanding.
Mhm.
Yeah, you settle into it perhaps.
In my mind, at least, how I distinguish between these two stages and this is, I'm going to use an example from science because it's just easier in my mind to do that. And then we can look for examples of how that's done, in a movement setting. So someone is sitting in their bedroom, or Albert Einstein is sitting in the garden, and he's looking at trees, he's looking at space, he's looking at everything around him, and he recognizes that there's something about gravity that we as a society haven't understood fully yet. And so he has a hypothesis that, okay, this is how gravity works, and this is how gravity affects the planets and affects the stars and everything. So before he can share that, he has to formulate it. He has to put it in practical senses for him, before he can go off and say to society, Eureka, or whatever the case may be. So he does his own experiments. This is the formulation of knowledge now. He has to do his experiments. He has to stress test it for himself. He has to get examples of where this is true. And he gets equations. He finally comes up with the master equation that explains gravity. So now he's going to stand up in front of a bunch of scientists, and a woman's going to put up her hand and she's going to ask Einstein, can you explain this to me so that I can go and validate it? So this part of the story is about that initial acquisition of knowledge, how it goes from nothing into being something. And then this part of the story is all those other scientists that Einstein taught are going to take it, validate it, understand it, apply gravity. Okay, Einstein, you've taught me this. Now I'm going to apply what you've taught me into this rocket ship that's going to the moon. What's going to be the implications of what you've told me in using gravity in bringing a spaceship onto the moon? And then building on that is a scientist is going to take that equation that Albert Einstein got, and now they're going to say, you know what? I have my own idea, and I'm going to use that to supplement, not make something new that's different to what Albert Einstein shared, but they're going to use that to build other things within the scientific community. I don't know if that meant then they're going to share what they understand and what they built and etc. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Emma? I don't even remember what your question was, to be honest.
I think to a degree, yeah.
Okay. So with the disputes about what the role of the second angel is, what our role is, that wasn't really the purpose of all of this. It was just that there's this circular nature to how we learn stuff, and how we go about teaching. And I think it's really important for us to remember that this is circular. It's not, yeah, I've just listened to this and I jump straight to this. Let me rub off some lines. And I rub off straight to this. It does happen and is necessary sometimes because we are humans and our fast brain says, this is exciting. I want to share it, how we're built. But this is, I'll say, the slow brain approach. And both of those happen from time to time. And sometimes it's necessary for this to take place, but we'll say most of the time, this is the process in which it needs to go down. And I've simplified this a lot. There's different steps along the way, and etc. etc. But at a high level, at least, this is your knowledge life cycle. So now we're at the point of sharing it. Now I want to share something with you all. How am I going to do that? How am I going to do that effectively? There's a term that the term is pedagogy, if I'm pronouncing that right. Has anyone come across this term? Does anyone know what this term is? So if you're Googling it, that's fine. I'll just read one of the definitions that I got. Pedagogy refers to the art, science, or profession of teaching. That's all. Fancy word of saying how teaching is done. And all that's included in that is the strategies. I'll come to the hand that was raised just now. It includes the different strategies that a teacher is going to use to teach, the different techniques that they're going to use. So strategies, techniques, and the different approaches that an educator or a teacher or a prophet will use to teach a different a concept. So at this point, the student has learned that the Sunday law is about human rights. Now they're going to share it. What are the different strategies that they're going to use to share this news? What are the techniques? And how do they approach the subject for different audiences? And so this idea of pedagogy, if I'm pronouncing that correct, involves, understanding how people learn and applying this knowledge to create, good environments for students to learn and building up good material for students to learn. There's no point taking something and just parroting it to every single person you come across, because every different individuals will have different ways in which they learn best. And so there's different approaches that one can take. But before I give what those approaches are, there was a hand that went up.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning, I can't remember the exact words. You mentioned maybe something like we all should be competent, some student teachers or whatever. But I just want to add that we have to have empathy and sympathy for those who are neurodivergent. I'm not talking about angels, I'm just talking about members who have maybe dyslexia, ADHD, all different learning difficulties, extremely shy. It's not an excuse not to teach, but what you're showing here, that even with all what you've shown, is that we all at different levels. We're all at different education levels. Some of us are neurodivergent. So even being neurodivergent or having a learning difficulty, that will help someone who is like you. But in the saying that, I would just want to say that we are not always all going to be at the same level, and that's fine, because I think people get frightened to teach because of being neurodivergent. Thank you.
I completely agree. And I think that's what this idea encompasses. And I think this is where I want to take this, is that there is no one perfect way in which to teach. Sorry. Because different students learn differently. There's a let me see if I can find it. There's a quote in the book itself that I'm going through, and I won't tell you what the book's name is for now, because we're going to go through all this together. But there's a term that points out, essentially what it says is that we're all different. There are similarities between us, but there are a lot more differences than we recognize in the way each of our brains function, not only as teachers, but as students as well. And so good teachers, speaking on the teacher side, are able to recognize that and able to shape how they teach to the different audiences that they have. And so these 5 different approaches, we'll go through each one of them individually in the next few weeks. The first one is called the constructivist. And so please write these down, because it would be great if, when we come next week and we go into these different approaches, we either have examples or we either have our own thoughts or on this.
So Curtis, are these 5 approaches to teaching as opposed to
Yeah.
techniques or strategies? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 5 different approaches. They're called the 5 pedagogical, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, pedagogical approaches. Collaborative, fourth is inquiry-based, and the 5th is reflective. Now, these are, you may be, your ears may be coming up and thinking, hold on, there's so much more. It can't just be these 5, but these are, I'll say, general frameworks at a very high level. Then as you drill down deeper into each and every one of these, you'll probably find what it is you think is a good way of teaching within these. So these are your high level definitions. And as we go into them next week, you'll see how there's even different sub levels to each of these. But and I just want to reiterate this, it's the point that Natalie made, is that the key to teaching is empathy. To teaching effectively is empathy. Now, empathy encompasses different things. One of them is being able to put yourself in the shoe of another and see things from their perspective. And then the other aspect of empathy is feeling what that person feels. And sometimes doing that all the time is not appropriate, and sometimes it is. And most of the time, it's important that you put yourself as a teacher in the shoes of the student. If you've stood up on Sabbath and you want to teach this thing, think about how the students are going to receive this thing, while pointing out that not all teachers are at the same level, but the whole idea of this exercise, of this, is that, wherever you find yourself in this cycle, wherever you find yourself at a level of being a teacher, whether you consider yourself, a really good teacher, or whether you consider yourself a beginner teacher, the hope is that through discussion, through learning together, we can all become better. And so that's what the focus of the next few Vespers that I take at least will be. And I would love your input as well. Yes, Sidri.
Curtis, what's the first one? Construct what?
Constructivist.
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 Oh, constructivist. Thank you.
Did you define the difference between technique, approach, and what's the first one, strategy? Is it? Or you do that another time?
Yeah, we can do that next week.
Mm-hmm. So we've got to look up these 5, have we, or try and work out what they are?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to say as well, it's when you're teaching and you've got a mixed audience, it's hard to, even though you should be making the complex simple, it's hard to keep those who are advanced interested and not bored, and without being rude, with the way I'm saying it, helping the others that to understand you are not quite getting it. So it's very complex
It is,
to
it
be,
is.
to
And
be
that's why
effective.
it's, yeah, it is. That's why I prefer, you know, the style in which we have our classes now, where one can, if they feel confident enough, ask questions along the way. Yeah. As opposed to, you know, a teacher just standing up and giving an hour lecture without any pauses, without any stop gaps. And that's a method of teaching actually, is stopping and ensuring that people are on the same wavelength. But as you put out, it's difficult when you have a mixed audience. So finding
what-
a good balance is important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's just clarify to me, I've forgotten. What's the difference then when Elder Paminda says, I'm the one who asks the questions, don't ask me questions too? I know it's different in a school because obviously that's what you're there for. You're there to ask questions. No, you're not. Even in a school, it doesn't allow you to really ask questions. If you don't understand something, you could put your hand up, but you still can't ask questions. But what you're saying here is, I like the way we're doing it because we can ask questions. So why
With
is there a
relation
difference?
to ask questions with relation to what's being studied. You know, not ad hoc questions about topics unrelated to what's being done there and there.
Is
So
that what
I'm
you
not
think,
going to
Elder
speak for Elder Paminda. I'm not going to answer for him.
Okay. All right.
But
So patience is another characteristic which is really important for teachers, isn't it?
for sure. And that's empathy. That comes from empathy, from having empathy and putting yourself in the shoes of the student.
Amen. Amen.
And the students, because the students can get impatient with the other students not knowing what they're talking about.
Yeah,
Being-
for sure.
And challenge to keep everyone on board when they've got different learning styles as well. That's what they're saying, isn't it? Some are visual, some are like diagrams, some don't. Just, yeah, lots of.
There are
focus, can't
at least general techniques that, as I said, most people, you know, learn better from. And then as you go into specifics of, if you want to say the best method, it then becomes very tailored towards different individuals. But for instance, teaching using parables, that's something that everyone learns by. And maybe parables, the world won't understand that concept, but teaching through examples, you know, that's something that everyone is aware of. Why? Because that's essentially being empathetic. It's you as a human do that every day of every life. I mean, every moment of your life is when you're growing up, you know, you look for different examples of which this thing that you've just learned applies to. You learn through examples. One of the most effective and easiest ways to teach concepts.
It's funny though, Curtis, because the disciples didn't understand Jesus, and sometimes us disciples don't understand the elders either. So parables can be complex.
If there's hidden meanings attached to them, as I said, at a broad level,
Yeah.
these
So
things.
at a simple level, I think like the SDA
Yeah.
Church, simple parables like we tell children they can understand. I was going to ask you, what do you think the difference, last question, sorry, difference between a good orator to a teacher?
I think they go hand in hand. A good teacher, I think, needs to be a good orator, and vice versa. However, oration, from what I understand, is, someone can correct me if they Google this, is that someone who's an orator, you know, stands up and they're able to articulate something in a public setting. They're good at public speaking. So they're
Okay.
eloquent, they're able to convey their message effectively.
Not like
Whereas a
Moses then.
teacher, yeah, exact. So maybe not like Moses, but
More
a
like
teacher
Barack
may be
Obama.
Moses. Yeah, so your teacher may be Moses, who is able to really drill down into a topic and effectively help students understand what it is that they're sharing. So your sweet spot, your gem, will be your good orator who is a good teacher. Not always do you have that to be the case. Sometimes good teachers who labor through stuff aren't good public speakers, and sometimes, a lot of
Yeah.
the time, orators are not good teachers.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion, at least.
To be both is that's a gift, because Moses wasn't.
Mhm.
He was there was others. If you look at I'll stop there because I don't want to say names.
Sure. Okay, so we can close there for today. And just, you don't have to go and read, papers about each of these. If you want to, then great. I'd love that. But if you can just come with, simple definitions of what a constructivist approach is to teaching, what an integrative approach, and some examples in everyday life, I would prefer those in everyday life, as well as examples, of, us and the Bible and the movement and etc. Why I say everyday life is because it's more relatable. Sometimes it's easier to get confused with material that we are currently learning than it is with everyday circumstances that a person goes through anyway. So yeah. I hope things made sense, and if they didn't, I would love your feedback. I don't know how to stop sharing. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. Excellent.
Thanks for everyone's participation. Let us close with a word of prayer. Dear God, we recognize that you've given us a high calling, one in which to take information that you send down through your angels, digest it, understand it, and then be work people for you, where we can then go and teach that to a wider audience. We know through experience and through, looking at the different teachers in the Bible that there were some good teachers and there were some teachers that weren't so good. But it's our hope and our ambition that we can each strive to be good teachers. We know that behaviors, skills are learned. That is one of the foundations of our messages, that gifts that we have when we're born can be cultivated, but also for those that may not have that inherited capabilities, it can be learned along the way. And so I thank you for that blessing. I thank you for the fact that we can be good if we're just taught how to be. And that teaching comes in different shapes and sizes for the different brains that each and every one of us have. And I pray that in this whole process, each of us may have empathy with each other, may have empathy as teachers, as students, and may have empathy with you as we try to recognize what you are teaching us, and what we are teaching you through our lived experiences. I pray thanking you, and I pray that the Sabbath may be a blessing. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.